entertainment.
Yeah.
It's across the board. So I have felt a big sense of responsibility in the position that I'm in. And I think that has to do with the platform that I have. And I know, I mean, just to say, I also feel like as a person of color, part of what you are raised with is the idea that you have to be better. You have to be the best in order to move forward because because of the inequity that exists.
Plus, you're living in kind of a hostile environment, or you're trying to excel in a hostile environment. And I learned early on, which is something I try to change for the students that I engage with in my current positions. But I learned very on that I could not trust the environment to give me appropriate feedback as to whether I was good, not good, could improve. I had to set those standards for myself because there were no role models out there that could say, hey, you can do this better. And they were so, you live in a world of assumptions about what you're capable of. And their expectations of the environment in healthcare were so low that if I were to just aspire to what they expected, I would be mediocre.
Yeah.
So I had to set my own standards.
I know our time with you is limited, and there's a few more things I did want to ask you about.
I know you do, but I have to cut you off again. I'm sorry.
Okay,
I
go
just
ahead.
have to
That's
say
okay.
this. I have to connect a dot here. So I was raised in a family of extraordinarily strong women. I have 3 amazing aunts. I had Bobby's mom, my grandmother, was incredible. But what I just heard from my aunt is something that I've never heard articulated through her or my mother, but is exactly what I was raised with. So I've internalized that. And my standard of excellence is built on my idea of excellence and not how I'm seen. And that's an extraordinary example and lesson for everybody. And I just wanted to point that out because that was amazing. Bobby kind of brought a little tear to my eye. I just want to say that. Okay, what was your question, John?
Oh my God. My question, and I will say just as a side
We're having a family reunion.
There's cool with me. Reune. It doesn't bother me a bit. Reune. I will say though, Tracy, just as a sidebar before we keep going, when I first saw you on like Girlfriends or Blackish, I was like, she is awesome. And then later I found out who your mother was, and I was like, oh, well, okay, that makes sense. So,
yeah, I come from a stock of great ladies. It's no accident I became a powerful woman who uses her voice.
And indeed you did. Indeed you did. Let me ask you on the patient side, though, about the intersection of Hollywood and healthcare. One might presume, Tracy, that if you're working in film, in TV, at a certain level, you are way more likely to get awesome healthcare, white glove treatment, certainly compared to the everyday person. Has that been your experience as it relates to gender parity, gender equity treatment in healthcare?
I obviously, I have a great union that serves me well. But I will say this: when you talk about patient care, there is real, again, data about how Black women, women of color, and our pain is responded to. And I'm sure Bobby can speak way more to this. But in terms of patient care and how the pain of women of color is listened to and responded to in the healthcare system, I think that's an area of inequity that we are working on, and that's cultural to me.
And I like what you brought up, Tracy, and Dr. Lee. Dr. Ross Lee, I was actually just going to ask you about pain management, because there have been studies that show that the way that doctors treat Black women as it relates to assessing and managing their pain are very different than the way they treat white women who express the pain that they're going through for whatever medical condition.
And Black men as well. It is a cultural thing, and it has a lot to do with how we perceive race and ethnicity in this country. Yeah.
I'm Joshua Johnson. You're listening to 1A. There's also been, Dr. Ross Lee, a great deal of talk in the last few years about Black women and mortality. You know, Serena Williams and Beyonce have been vocal about the dangers they face during childbirth, and studies show that Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely than white women to die from pregnancy-related complications. Now, I'm sure there is a myriad of factors for that, but in the context of something like times of healthcare, in terms of what you can do internally inside the system, in what ways might you be able to address that?
fundamentally, if you have a workforce that is culturally sensitive, that it treats women in a way that's equitable, that translates to patient care.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't have a workforce, which is what Time's Up is aiming and focusing on, you don't have that workforce, you cannot address those issues that are those disparities that are borne by racial and ethnic populations. You just can't do it. And so you got to start here in order to get there. And yes, by the way, many of the statistics related to maternal and child health and fetal or infant mortality, those percentages haven't changed much since slavery. We're still 2.5 times more likely for children of color to die, or for maternal deaths. In this day and age, there should never be a maternal death.
Clearly, the Time's Up initiative has brought a lot of vocal and powerful and influential women to the forefront to say things have got to change and they are going to change. One question I hear a lot from men is whether there's any role for us. So for the men who feel supportive of Time's Up, of Me Too, of these kinds of movements, what would you ask them to do? Or do you just need us to kind of get out of the way? Tracy?
Well, I think accountability is a real thing, and I also think this is a time for men to listen and ask themselves some real questions. There's a lot to learn, and there's a lot of unlearning to do. I think there are some wonderful male allies, but if you're going to call yourself an ally, I think there's questions to ask yourself. What does that mean? And maybe there's a lot of listening to do. But we're attempting to create and envision a world that has not yet existed. So that requires a lot of, I think, on men's part, sitting back for a moment and listening.
And Doctor, I'll give you the last word.
Actually, I would say 3 things, and 2 of those Tracy's already said. Listening is really important. Number 2 is accountability in whatever position they hold of power, that they could make a difference. And add their voice to the discussion. Because for us to just do it for us, with us, is not going to make the kind of policy changes that we absolutely need to make in order for us to be a part of the solution.
Dr. Barbara Ross Lee with the Advisory Board of Time's Up Healthcare. Doctor, thanks for talking to us.
Thank you very much.
And Tracy Ellis Ross, who plays Dr. Rainbow Johnson on the ABC sitcom Blackish, a founding member of Time's Up and a member of the Advisory Board of Time's Up Entertainment. Tracy, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was a real treat for me.
Just ahead, when you're grounded, you know you're in trouble. We'll get an update on flight safety in the wake of the latest airline accidents. Stay close.
That this is a particularly painful chapter of American history because it undermines our national identity of being a place where anybody can become an American.
I'm Ari Shapiro. White nationalism's American Roots, this afternoon on All Things Considered from NPR News.
Join us for All Things Considered at 4 today on WHYY. Forecast for today, partly sunny skies and mild highs reaching the mid-60s. There is a chance for thunderstorms overnight. And into tomorrow, Friday, another mild day with highs once again in the mid-60s. Right now in Philadelphia, partly sunny skies and 53 degrees.
Supporting WHYY, Walnut Street Theater's The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. After 15-year-old Christopher is wrongly accused of a crime, he sets out to investigate on his own in this heartwarming adventure. Now through April 28th, walnutstreettheater.org.
The largest death row in the country is shutting down.
The backstop for an execution for taking of another life is the governor of the state of California.
What California's move means for the future of capital punishment across the United States. I'm Tanzina Vega, and that's next time on The Takeaway from WNYC and PRI. Weekdays from noon to 1 on WHYY. Support for NPR comes from this station and from CuriosityStream, a documentary streaming service from the founder of Discovery Channel, where people can watch history, science, and nature shows. More at curiositystream.com/NPR. From Home Instead Senior Care, committed to helping seniors stay in their own home, offering personalized in-home services, including personal care, transportation, and memory care. Learn more at homeinstead.com/NPR. And from Americans for the Arts.
Commercial air travel has an extremely high safety record. Plane crashes are quite rare overall. But a pattern of crashes and other safety concerns were enough to ground the worldwide fleet of one of Boeing's most important planes. Bowing to the inevitable, yesterday President Trump announced that the U.S. would join other countries and ground all of Boeing's 737 MAX aircraft. This followed a deadly crash last weekend of an Ethiopian Airlines MAX jet. It was the second accident involving that kind of aircraft in the last 5 months. What took the FAA so long? And what does all this mean for you and me as air travelers? Joining us from NPR West near Los Angeles is Andy Pastor, a senior special writer with the Wall Street Journal who covers aviation and space. Andy, welcome to 1A.
Thanks for having me here.
By the way, we did invite Boeing and the FAA to come on this program. Neither responded to our invitations. Those invitations stand, and the acting administrator of the FAA spoke to Morning Edition. Both of them have gone on the record about the crashes, and we'll get to their statements in just a bit. But Andy, let's just get the basic information first. What led up to the grounding of the Boeing MAX planes?
This has been a worldwide movement, of course. There was a crash, as you said, of a Lion Air 610, Flight 610, which occurred at the end of October, and it really shined the spotlight on a specific automated flight control system that Boeing developed for this plane. It is not on any of their other aircraft, and if it misfires under certain circumstances and pilots don't react properly, you can have a fatal accident, as happened with Lion Air. And the whole issue became much more heated because this past Sunday there was an Ethiopian airline jet, same model, and it appears from very early preliminary clues it may have been a similar sequence of events which brought that plane down. So you had tremendous pressure overseas, beginning with the Chinese and then dozens of other countries to ground this aircraft, and the FAA actually held its position that it didn't have enough information and data to do that until this week.
And I do want to talk about the data the FAA had. I should note, by the way, we do welcome your questions and thoughts about this story regarding Boeing, especially if you work in aviation. Email us 1a@wamu.org, tweet us at 1a, or comment on our Facebook page. Andy, you mentioned this automated flight control system on the Boeing MAX planes. Are systems like that unusual?
No, but the design of the system is what's come under question. And to put this into a little bit of context, automation, of course, has been a growing phenomenon in many fields, particularly in aviation. But with this particular plane, under certain circumstances, the pilots may not know exactly what's going on, and there are issues about training, there are issues about what information is in the manuals. So automation by itself is a tremendous help to safety, but the specific question here is how to make pilots aware of the system and how to prevent the system from misfiring or going off in a situation where it shouldn't. And that's a design issue, and this is really the first time in 2 decades that Boeing has faced specific questions about its design principles leading to fatal accidents, and that's why this is so important.
As we mentioned, the president announced the emergency order grounding these planes over U.S. airspace yesterday afternoon. Here's part of what he said.
The FAA is prepared to make an announcement very shortly regarding the new information and physical evidence that we've received from the site and from other locations and through a couple of other complaints. We've had a very, very detailed group of people working on the 737-8 and the 737 airplanes. We're going to be issuing an emergency order of prohibition to ground all flights of the 737 MAX 8 and the 737 MAX 9 and planes associated with that line.
That was President Trump speaking yesterday. He mentioned that there was new data that they received that led to this grounding order. What were these new data?
They were refined satellite data showing the precise trajectory of the aircraft before it crashed. It's had a roller coaster movement, which was similar to the movement that happened in the earlier Lion Air crash. And so that refined satellite information, along with some evidence that investigators gathered on the ground about basically the condition of the wings and what panels on the wings were not deployed. They're called flaps. Those two things together prompted the FAA to take action. But to take a little bit of a step back, I think that these two accidents will become incredibly important in the history of aviation safety. Even the casual observer of aviation knows about TWA 800 and Malaysia 370. They become part of the culture, if you will. I think these two accidents will become equally important, really for two reasons. Number one, the reputation of the FAA, it seems, has been certainly blemished for the short term. The speed with which they acted, and the willingness of many other countries to act before they did anything, and in fact countries that have looked to the FAA for leadership for decades, going out on their own to decide that for safety reasons, for an abundance of caution, they should ground the aircraft. That's really something that the aviation world has not seen, I believe, for a very, very, very long time. And the second aspect of this is that the way the plane was designed and the way the FAA oversaw the design of the aircraft may be emblematic of a new way of enforcement and oversight by the U.S. government of aviation safety. Much more cooperative, less enforcement, much more of a carrot, less of a stick, and there'll be congressional hearings, there'll be lots of questions, and this will be a major point about how carefully and rigorously the design was overseen by regulators.
Yeah, that's one of the questions that David Green tried to press Dan Elwell, who is the acting administrator of the FAA. Today, on Morning Edition, he asked him if pressure from Boeing had contributed to the federal government delaying its announcement to ground these planes. Here is part of what Administrator Elwell said.
The FAA makes safety decisions, period. Conversations with Boeing at the technical level about the aircraft, what they knew or didn't know, consultation, absolutely that took place. That always takes place with safety discussions and incidents. But that's it.
That's Dan Elwell, the acting administrator of the FAA, speaking this morning on Morning Edition. Mallory tweeted, "The U.S.'s reluctance to ground these planes just proves that we as a country value money over people's lives." Andy, that's one of the big arguments, or at least one of the big assumptions that came out after this, that there was some kind of back and forth between the White House, Boeing, and the FAA, and that there was more behind the scenes being considered than just flight safety. But is there any proof of that? Do we know what the back and forth was?
I think some of that has still to come out, but it's a complicated issue, and I think there's going to be lots of discussion about pressure from the industry to hold off on the grounding. But if you look at it this way, it may help you. It may help your listeners put it into a little bit of perspective. It is true that the FAA for decades has prided itself and has been seen as the gold standard of aviation safety because it acted on data. Lots of voluntary reports by pilots, lots of data from the airlines, and it analyzed and acted in a very methodical manner. It is also true that in these two crashes, it's only with this new information that the precise data was available to really make those decisions. But I think the FAA has not fully understood that the world and the reaction to crashes around the globe has changed, and they failed to understand that out of an abundance of caution, to show that the regulators are proactively and aggressively dealing with potential problems, so many countries took the unilateral step of putting these planes on the ground, and the FAA's position until the president's announcement had been sort of the old way of looking at these things, and a very rigorous, fact-based, methodical approach. And there are many people who think that's the right approach, but I would say there's an increasing number of safety experts, even around the world, who say that in today's world, you need to be more proactive, and you may need to step out before all the facts are in.